All right, so before we get into Django models themselves, let's actually talk about some of the reasons as to why Django models exist in the first place, as part of the reason why databases exist in the first place. So if we look at a CSV file, this is a really, really simple database file. It's not really a database, but it's a way to store data in a very structured manner, storing them into tables. Hopefully you're already well aware of this, but if you're not, essentially you have rows and columns. That's a table. Right? So that's a table in terms of storing data. Now, when we actually come in here, we can start off by declaring which columns are in those tables. So like ID and let's say title, price, something like that, right? So ID, title, price would be attributes of any given product or any given piece of data I want to put in here. So piece data being like, hey, the first one I'm going to put in here is going to be an ID of 1, and my first product will be the title, and then the price will be something like $19.99. And then the second one, very similar, my second product and $19.29. Okay, so we've got a few different options here on how we can actually declare out this data. But there's a big disadvantage to using CSV files for storing data like this. Well, there's several disadvantages, but one of them being a CSV file, all of these things are treated as the same, right? So this is just another entry in this value. But if you actually open this up in, let's say, for instance, numbers or Excel, you can actually use these values in a new way. So there's a few things that we can talk about here. Number one, we can actually give a shipping price, and that shipping price, we can make it equals to the column next to it, so the price column next to it. Let's zoom in here a little bit so we can say equals, and that's going to be that price, and then times 0.75 or something like that. And that gives me now a shipping price, which is a really high shipping price. And then I can, of course, scroll down on that, and I get the next row has that same shipping price. But if I try to save this now, regardless of what program I'm in, it's no longer going to save this as a CSV file. The big question as to why, well, it's because there's an actual method that's happening in here. There's a function that's actually happening that causes me to not be able to save it inside of a CSV file anymore. Or at least the program doesn't want that to happen. Of course, I can export it and do all that. Now, without getting too much in the weeds of all of these different features of how this data works, we see that different types of storing of data are better suited for different kinds of data, right? So eventually what we want is a production database, something like MySQL or PostgreSQL, to actually run our data. There's a lot of different reasons for this. One of them is the fact that it's much, much faster at retrieving and adding data very quickly, right? So like adding data to a CSV file on your local machine, not that big of a deal. But if 1,000 people wanted to add that to that same exact CSV file on your same machine from thousands of different locations, we're going to have a lot of problems. The next has to do with data types themselves, right? So inside of a CSV file, this is a number. You and I know that this is a number. It's an integer, right? You and I know that this is a decimal place number. It has a decimal in there, right? You and I know that this is just letters. There's no numbers in it at all. But a CSV file doesn't distinguish these things differently. It actually distinguishes them the same. It's not until you actually open up something like Numbers or Excel that have some features built into recognizing numbers, integers, strings, and all that it really starts to shine. But then when you bring it one step further and do a production database like MySQL or PostgreSQL, those data types make a huge difference. Now, the reason I'm saying all this stuff is because it's incredibly important for connecting this concept of data types and where to store this data with what Django models do. So let's go ahead and take this same example and apply it into a Django model.